And that's how this all got started. I had these two screenshots and a hard deadline 7.5 months in the future. It really should have been easy.
Several months later.
Yep, the project hasn't even started and we already have a 2-month time jump. At this point, I decided I should really get a head start on this project, so I filmed a super concise intro that boiled down to something along the lines of this. One of my friends from high school wanted a broadcast desk, kind of like this one. He asked if I could build it, and kind of as a joke, I was like, yeah, sure I could build it, because at the time I had happened to be watching this video, and you know, if some guy on YouTube can do it, almost anyone can do it, right? All that was back in June. But stuff happened and, well, now it's September and I gotta get this thing done before, well, the snow falls. I've got about 1 weekend that I've set aside. I took the Friday off of work and we're gonna try to get this thing built. It looks kind of like a bean if you look from the top, and it's about 8 feet long, so it's probably one of the bigger things that I've made for anyone else. My plan was to laser cut the border in separate strips, then glue them to the tabletop and then use those strips as a sort of router template. I've never actually used a template really, so I have a router, but there's, I guess, only one way to find out. For the front of the desk, we're going for a solid curved surface, hence this inspiration. Luckily, I don't have to worry too much about the wood grain because the whole table will be a solid black. Although eventually there'll be some vinyl wrapping on the front, but it's still got to be a solid front face. So I have some ideas of how I want to curve it. Hopefully I have some 5mm or like 1/4 inch plywood that you get from Home Depot, and hopefully I can just slot it and then glue it onto like a sort of frame backing. I'm not sure if that's going to work either. I've accounted in the budget for making a lot of mistakes, but I haven't accounted any time for making the mistakes, and so I really need to get started making those mistakes. Okay, so here's the issue I'm having now. Look here. These pieces, they are, the laser cut isn't going all the way through. So I'm having 2 issues here. Every so often, I think it's hitting like an area of glue where the laser just doesn't go all the way through. And it's getting really annoying. These ones I've mostly sanded off, but even like there, you can see the edge. Dude, stop complaining. I'm running 2 passes on it because I'm really trying to get through that layer of glue. It still doesn't get all the way through, but hopefully the second pass increases my odds of not having to sand down so many of those like nubs. I've realized now that it would have probably been faster for me to just trace it out, either using paper or even just using some string and a pencil, because none of these curves here are actually complex splines or anything. They're all just standard radii. So this is where it's going down. It's about the only place where I can fit a 4x8 sheet and work on it kind of continuously. So I have the 4x8 sheet here and we're just gonna pull it down and hopefully get to work on this. I've got the frame pieces here. I think I'm gonna glue them together as a big frame first. Kind of sounds like it could work well or work really badly, but I'm pretty committed to trying to glue it up today. So if I glue it onto the main sheet, I think it'll be okay. Kind of interesting when you're moving these. Ugh. The amount of air that moves with it. We're just gonna start with 1 sheet for now. Put that down on top of the foam, and then I'll put these back on this side because it's more stable. Got some of this thin plastic that you usually put on the outside of houses. I'm gonna lay that down on top just so that I can set up this glue without really worrying about it sticking. This roll is actually free. And then there's the parts. And there it is. So that's how it looks laid out on the full 4x8 sheet. And it fits just about exactly as we had planned for. I asked him before if he wanted to fill it out a little bit and use the extra couple inches to make it, I think, a little bit longer. But my friend said to just leave it this length, so this is what we're gonna go with. It's already, I guess, a pretty big table. Once you see it in person, it's kind of deceiving, imagining standing, having 4 people or 3 people stand, 1, 2, 3, 4, or something like that. I'm not really sure if it's bigger or smaller than I thought it would be. Anyways, I'm gonna let the glue dry, so now I'm gonna start mocking up the leg design. Actually, I might nail it down first. I'm gonna flip it over so that the staples are on the same side as the tabletop. I'm thinking maybe I'll trace it first and then cut it, because that way the edge of it doesn't get in the way of whatever tool I'm using to actually cut. I don't have a jigsaw. I have one of those like oscillating saws. I could either use that or I could use just a circular saw a whole bunch of times. I went around and filled all the little gaps with sawdust and CA and then let the whole thing dry. I'm gonna pull the plastic out from underneath here and then trace it out, and I'm thinking to cut it out using this orbital saw just because it's what I have on hand. Sometimes I wonder why some cameras don't record sound in time-lapse mode. I mean, like, I get it, but it couldn't have been that hard to add, and sometimes it's nice to have audio cues, even if it's just as background noise. And now I've got the basic outline cut out. I still got to route it down, but I think I'm gonna sand these burnt edges a little bit. They're a little bit rough, and if I have to sand it down afterwards, then I'll also have to sand down the 3/4 inch plywood. It'll be faster to sand a little bit right now just to give it a little bit of a smoother edge. I'm using 150 grit and should be pretty quick. So now it's the next morning. I kind of didn't get as much done as I had hoped. The next step is to route out that edge and flush it up with that template that I glued on. With the amount of extra I left, I think I probably should be using a bigger router bit, but I only actually have a 1/4 inch flush trim bit. So we're just gonna have to make that do. Okay, so now I've got it all routed out and it's pretty much flush, as you can see, going around. That router bit seemed to work pretty good. Even though it was small, it just took a little bit longer, but kind of got the job done. There's still some like little gaps, especially where the template was being glued together. So like something like this, right? So I think I'm gonna try to use some wood filler and just smooth out the edge, then give that some time to dry. Eventually this whole thing will be black because the table that it's based off is all black. But before I do that, I kind of want to try staining the wood with like a super dark stain, just to try it. I just kind of want to experiment to see what plywood looks like while stained, because I've never actually done it, and if it's going to be painted black anyways, I figured I might as well. Even if it looks bad, I can just paint over it, so it doesn't really matter. Watching myself do this now kind of makes me cringe, but at the time, I thought it was just a harmless experiment. You know, one of those, at least I learned something kind of moments. It's always tough because theoretically, if I had researched more, I might not have done this step. But on the other hand, if I had researched more, I might have never started. So who knows? While the stain was drying, I had some time to think about how I'm gonna construct that front surface of the desk, and I had two ideas. But unfortunately, the first one had nothing to do with this project at all, and so now it's the next weekend. Yeah, not the most ideal situation, but that's how things go. So for this front surface, I want to have the curved piece that goes along that front edge. And so I'm going to start building a template with which to make a bunch of form pieces. So basically they're going to be following that curve and flat, laying flat like this, but at different levels below the tabletop. And then from there, I can use that as a form to bend the wood around it. So it happened again. I had this template cut out, but I had offset this inner radius by 1/2 inch in the wrong direction. So I went downstairs to cut out another template, and well, 5 hours later, I'm back, and turns out it didn't even matter. Not sure how most people do this, but I have a screenshot of the CAD model on my phone down there, and I'm basically just tracing it out onto the piece of wood. As you might have noticed, I did eventually get a jigsaw, and it made it a lot easier to cut these out. I only actually had to trace out the outline on the first rib. After the first one, I could trace the rest of them from the first one as a template. My camera battery ran out, so we're going to skip to assembling it. My friend Jack came over to help me put all these together. These cross-member standoff pieces are just random scraps of wood that I found, and I initially just screwed them in and then also shot a couple nails in just to keep them from twisting. Okay, so we got the slits, a little bit higher density here, and medium density for the larger curve radius, and then over here, went back to high density. So now we just have to glue it on the form. So after all that, I pretty much get a fancy wave looking seesaw thing. I've got the frame set up, and I think the edges are pretty much as smooth as they need to be. I've got those kerf cuts in here. So now I pretty much just want to lay it on there and glue it on. I think I'd like to do the whole thing at once, but the limitation right now is I actually don't have enough clamps, and I'm not even gonna bother to get more because it's kind of later at night. So I think I'm just gonna do the center section. This is also the biggest glue up I've ever done. I don't really know what I'm doing, and so I'm guessing starting with a smaller section will make things a little bit easier. I do have a good amount of leeway of about 1/2 inch on all sides, so it doesn't have to be too precise, and I don't think the glue set time is that short, so I think I have time, and if I'm patient enough, I think I can get this right, hopefully on the first try, and if not, I really don't know what I'm gonna do, because, well, yeah, who knows. This may or may not be a time lapse, depending on how exciting it is. Hopefully not exciting, but you never know. See, I feel like at this point, watching this back, I'll be thinking there's some very obvious something that I should have done at this point in the process. Right now, I'm just the ignorant version of myself, so there's only one way to find out. That's to get covered in glue. You'll see here, in order to apply pressure to the center of the board, I just piled on a bag of sand and some concrete pavers. I guess I must have lost the footage of me gluing the ends down, but this is the first time I got to see what that curved front surface would actually look like. I was pretty happy with how well the curve worked, but I was a little bit worried that one of the little slits would crack, and so I decided for the next layer to use something called the wiggle board, which is a type of plywood that has all the grain running in the same direction, so it's very flexible. Kind of interesting. It's a little bit high, but the real thing will be shorter because I haven't cut these down yet, and then this whole thing will be smooth, and that it'll all be the same color of black. So far, I think it looks pretty cool. Got these two parts out here while I go cut this flexible sheet down. I'm gonna cut it to the same 37 inches. Once I finally got this flex piece curved and glued in, it's kind of a relatively easy point to stall on because something was successful. So now I need to push forward and really finish this front surface. I don't even know what I'm gonna do for these edges yet. So I've cut off about the foot section. So it's 48 inches. This is only 37 inches, so this is about 11 inches left, and the rest of it's over there. So now I'm just gonna test to see how well it forms to this curve. I don't know if you can hear that, but especially when the first time I did it, it like crinkles a lot. Like if I go do this side, I'm pretty sure you'll, like as I form it, you can hear something like crackling, but it doesn't seem to break, and that's kind of what matters. Now that I know that I'm not gonna have to cut any more slits, and this is pretty much, I think it's good to go. It's fitting the curvature pretty well, like very tightly in there. So now I just gotta bite the bullet and do it. So there it is. I've got all the clamps on. I don't know what made me think I should do the whole thing in one go. Probably would have been better to do the center and one side and then leave the other side for another day, but it's too late now. I have no idea if this glue is even gonna stick. Yeah, I rolled it on pretty thin, and the two issues with that I'm thinking might come up is, firstly, it might have dried out too quickly because I rolled it on thin. It might have dried out before the other sheet of wood came in contact with it, which is, you know, not ideal. And then the other problem is because the glue doesn't have any volume because I rolled it on thinner. If there's any like little gaps, it might have just not come in contact at all. So I try to go around the edges and like tape up where it wasn't contacting, because I think the edges are where most of the strength comes in from the two sheets being glued together. But honestly, I have no idea. We'll really just have to see. Yeah, this is just kind of a big mess. Oh, it's a good time. So it's not the next morning, it's the next evening, which means this glue should have dried by now. I guess the real test will see how much you can press in on this, because you won't be able to really tell how well the glue connected unless it just completely falls off, which would be bad. It was quite the relief to get these clamps off. I mean, I was only using the long ones because that's what I had, but I had to be pretty careful whenever I was bending down that I didn't get poked in the eye. I added some clamps and ran a board, or a culling board, right on the edge, and then on the other side, same thing, right down the edge. So I think that should seal it up pretty decent. Now I just gotta figure out what I'm gonna do for the rest of this curve. I might just be custom shaping it out of MDF with sander. We were a couple months in here, and the garage started getting too cold. It may have also been snowing, so I had to move things to the basement. One of the challenges I'm facing is that there's this gap here, because this curved section is longer than 8 feet long, so I didn't have enough material to actually go the full length of this curved section, because it's like about 100 inches. Originally I had this curved section continue just like it does on the other side, but yesterday I cut it off straight so that it kind of lines up as a relatively straight line. And then I have this piece of MDF. This is 3/4 inch MDF, and I just cut out a strip from a 4x4 sheet. So this kind of fits not very snugly. I mean, here it's not too bad, but as you can see, there's quite a bit of light seeping through. So I can press it in a little bit, but it's still not that great of a fit. But I think I just need to get this started, so I'm probably gonna cut this top part off and then just try gluing it in with a bunch of clamps just to get started. I've got this attached now. just with a bunch of clamps. I don't have that much clamping force on the inside edge here, and I just piled on glue, so that's not a particularly good technique, but I think it should dry. At least I'm hoping it does. And on this side, just laid in a bead of glue in there. I'm okay with it having holes because, I mean, this is all going to be sanded down sort of to be sort of tangent with that anyways. And then any holes after all the glue drips out will just be filled with wood filler. Yep. So that's the joint. I mean, it's not great, but it'll get the job done, I think. And feels decently secure, or at least good enough. Pretty sure it's not straight, but that's fine. We'll just take the rest of it that's not aligned and turn it into sawdust. After a little bit of sanding, it looks pretty smooth, almost like a continuous surface. Because in fact it is a continuous surface. I mean, this is the other side. Unfortunately, my dust collector hose doesn't reach that far, so I have to turn it around. So now we gotta actually go to town sanding this thing. Just penciled in like a kind of general sort of curve sort of thing that I could potentially aim for, but I think it's just gonna be wing it and see what happens. So I got my makeshift adapter that will allow me to plug in the sander, and that'll work good enough, I think, for now, at least temporarily. And now the problem is this hose, which is like probably 2 inches. I gotta connect it to my dust collector, and I know obviously that's got problems with the whole pressure thing because this is high volume, low pressure, or whatever, but I don't care. But the proper way to do this would to be, well, first of all, not to use this, but assuming that I do use it, the proper thing to do would probably be to build an adapter for it, or probably 3D print an adapter to connect this to there. But honestly, I'm under a pretty tight time constraint, and that time constraint is really just Air 500 time out of my brain. So I got this random piece of packaging foam, so we're just gonna take this. I'm gonna try to cut it down to kind of like a pointed edge here. Okay, so now see it's kind of slow. Then I'm gonna stick it on here. So I know there's gonna be air losses in that edge, but I really don't care. I'm just gonna wrap this up. This looks kind of round enough. There's definitely like a whole bunch of leaks there, but let's see what happens when I turn it on. Even though I was using 60 grit sandpaper, it was still taking quite a bit of time to carve this curve into the MDF, and that's when I remembered that I had these card scrapers. I actually got these to experiment smoothing 3D prints out, but I thought I should try it out just for fun. Turns out card scrapers are not the right tool for carving MDF, but it was kind of fun to do. this is one end. I basically just needed to have a piece to continue on, and really there's not that much progress or anything, but this is the first side and it's going to be different from the other side, which kind of bothers me a little bit, but it'll be fine. This side I'm putting a piece here, and then I'm going to put another piece on here, like flat there, and then just sand it down to a curve. Whereas on this other side, I'm not quite sure what I'm doing here. I'll try to draw it out, but I think it might be faster for me to just chop off all the corners and then glue a piece here, and because then I can screw it into here. I don't have to worry about cutting these offset thingies. I'd recently picked up one of these battery operated routers, and I was kind of excited to use it, but unfortunately this roundover bit that I wanted to use on these ends didn't fit. So I guess it's back to the big router. Quick word of advice: don't use the stock GoPro mount as a mouthpiece, especially when you're doing something that'll kick up a lot of sawdust. It really doesn't taste good in your lungs. Okay, so I was originally planning to go and prime and paint this MDF section first, but I decided that once I start painting things, it's probably best to not be cutting too much around here because the dust will get everywhere. I mean, it's already everywhere, but anyways. I'm gonna try trimming this first. The challenge is I need to cut this lip down to be 1/2 an inch from this surface here. And so what I'm planning to do is take this scrap piece of 1/2 inch MDF that I got off the street and basically cut a curve here that kind of matches that curve. And I'm going to place it in there and clamp it in this position, and then come along from this side and flush trim it with a router, and then just reclamp it every foot until I get to the end. My flush trim bit wasn't quite long enough for the bearing to reach at the farthest corner, so I resorted to using a combination of a jigsaw and then a hand planer. Definitely not the right tool for the job, but it got it done. Okay, so here's the problem. So far it's looking pretty good. I've gotten it to be mostly flush with the 1/2 inch kind of template backing, but it's taking a long time and it's very tricky to do because gravity's working against me. So when I hold the router here, it flings dust up and then it lands on it, and then the bearing's rolling over the dust, and so I'm trying to hold a vacuum while I'm running it, and that's not working out too great. So what I'm going to do is just, well, what I want to do is rotate the table, obviously, so that this surface is like this. So it's horizontal, then gravity's working for me. But then the problem is this stuff gets in the way once I move over to the center section. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab another one of these work table thingies, and I'm going to put the whole thing up on the frame of it. So that should give me enough space to work, and then hopefully it'll be a little bit quicker. Okay, so now we have this edge pretty much straight, and it's exactly 1/2 an inch, or as close as I can get, 1/2 an inch across the whole length. But now I gotta do this side. This is gonna be the top edge, and it's actually gonna be tucked under the front lip of the table, so that this front surface actually extends past this edge. So this edge actually doesn't need to be very clean. So this side should go much quicker. As well, this side's not going to be offset from this top surface from the rib. It's actually going to be just completely flush. So this will be a completely flat surface across, and that's going to be where I'm going to attach the table surface on. So hopefully this side goes a little bit quicker. I let the second coat of primer dry for about an hour, and then I gave it a quick sanding down with 400 grit. And at this point, I'm not quite sure if I need to be putting a third coat of primer or some other kind of filler. There's quite a few little cracks here and there that are much more apparent once you put the white primer on. But on the other hand, I'm also kind of a little bit too impatient to fix all of that, because I really want to see what it looks like in black, because that was kind of the whole point. So I'm just gonna hope that once I paint it black, all the cracks will kind of hide themselves, and hopefully the paint sort of levels it out a little bit. I mean, it feels decently smooth, but you know, that's not necessarily the best for like a durable finish. As you can see, the first coat of paint was really splotchy. I noticed, you might see during the time lapse, but when I started rolling it on, it really didn't want to stick. The paint didn't want to stick. I guess my camera died, but that's what I said. I'm having a little bit of trouble with all these grooves in the wood, and so I'm going to try using wood filler. It's not going to look good right now, but I think it might save me a lot of painting time, because this stuff hopefully will dry much thicker. So I'm going to grab some of this wood filler that I used previously. So I put a little bit in a cup here. I saw this on the internet, and I don't really know if this will stick to a painted surface, but I figure it's kind of worth a try. We're just going to add a little bit of water. Kind of just took all the crumbly bits from the container. So hopefully it rehydrates it into a sort of smooth slurry. Okay, as you can see, I've kind of spot filled. These are just some of the other bigger dents, but you can see this texture here. I can't like spot fill the whole thing. This was just a plain wood filler, so I'm gonna get my kind of goopy wood filler. At this point, I'm pretty sure I can just sand this stuff off, so I'm gonna just smear some on. And then for experiment's sake, I'm gonna try using this random piece of plastic 3D print and just scraping off the top layer. Seems like this stuff's getting in there pretty good, which is good, but I think it's a little bit globbier than I want. It's not quite seeping in as much as I want it to. So there's kind of a balance. You want it to be thick enough that it coats the surface. If it's too thin, it won't fully bridge the gaps. But if it's too thick, then it won't go all the way into the gaps. Or at least that's how I imagine it. After that initial spot testing, I was pretty sure that this method would work, so I went ahead and just covered the whole surface with this goopy stuff. 3 hours later, and I got a whole bunch of sanding to do. Okay, so went over it quickly with a paper towel, with just a smidge of alcohol to hopefully collect some of the dust. It does kind of look a little bit crazy. It's got that kind of weathered texture almost. If this was intentional, it did. I mean, a lot of stuff got filled in. I'm not sure how well it's gonna stick or how effectively it's gonna stay under the paint, but it did in fact fill the gaps that I was hoping it would. So now, basically, just gonna give it maybe couple minutes to dry, and then I'm gonna, at least on some section probably over here, I'm gonna sample making a batch of, like a small batch of chalk paint, because there's still some irregularities, and supposedly chalk paint's, I think, good for that. You'll notice some of these little holes on the top, or what is going to be the bottom edge. Those are from those slots that I cut in this inside sheet before. But I thought it'd be kind of funny if I just had wood hardener go down those kind of, well, I don't know. If it hardened things up, why not? So that it would soak into the back of that top sheet. Just kind of a weird, intrusive thought I had. So I stole one of these things. My brother got his wisdom teeth out, and I'm gonna try to see if I can pull in some wood hardener and then just like lay it down in those holes. As you'd expect, this stuff is kind of sticky, so when you try to push it out of a syringe, it's hard to move the syringe plunger smoothly. It'll kind of stick, and then a bunch will come out at once, and that has a tendency to run over the edge, and sometimes it can even splash upwards. So if for some reason you ever wanted to do this, I'd highly recommend wearing safety glasses for it. We're looking at the bottom edge here, and on the right you can see that front edge that I cut to protrude past the bottom rib. The reason we did this was so that we could put these adjustable feet in, and they would be hidden behind the front surface. I tried to position them far enough back that it would look like the front surface is just floating, and I think the black color really sells this illusion. It's finally coming together. Just propped it up. Obviously still needs another round of sanding and then another final coat of paint, but so far it looks much better when the light's not like directly glaring off of it. Right now the glare is going down, so this is more of a kind of realistic lighting for what it's going to be used for, and it looks much better, obviously hiding the streak marks quite a bit more. I mean, you can still kind of see it, but this is pretty exciting. Stands up on its own, and I think we've got a pretty clearish path forward. My next step is going to be to build the third leg for the back, and then mount the tabletop on top, and we'll paint it again. So this is a kind of surprise. If I measure this length here, it's right underneath 11 inches. Going this way, it's also that this piece here is also just under 11 inches. So say 11 inches. But then I look at this piece here, and it's under 10.5 inches. And so you might think, well, maybe this whole bottom layer is just shorter. But if you measure these ones, that's 11 inches, that's 11 inches, that's 11 inches, and that's 11 inches. Which means just this one piece is shorter than all the rest of them. And so even if you measure this whole front top center length, it's about 35, and then out on the ends it's about 35.5, which means the center of this whole front surface is 1/2 inch shorter than both the ends. And that means that the bottom isn't actually straight. I always thought that it was just the unevenness in the floor, which partly might be it, but the gap here is actually thinner by half an inch, which is like kind of a lot. Luckily, it's all dark and it's all going to be floating a little bit, so you can't quite tell as much, hopefully. I mean, I can see it now more than now that I'm kind of thinking about it, but I don't have time to fix that. So I guess I'm kind of lucky in the fact that I just happened to put the short one on the bottom, so it's not going to affect the tabletop surface. This top edge should be straight, because it's got three ribs supporting it in a parallel orientation. But I'm just kind of I'm really surprised that I didn't notice that before, and little annoyed at the fact that I missed that. I mean, having gone through this whole thing of putting the surface on and cutting it off and painting it and everything, theoretically I could have compensated for that while I was trimming the bottom, but really wouldn't make much of a difference. I mean, half an inch is a lot, but on an 8-foot table, it'll have to be the way it is. I guess that's just what makes this whole thing one of a kind, because nobody would ever go through all this work to accidentally make the center half an inch shorter than the rest. Anyways, now I've got to worry about how I'm going to make this leg, which is actually how I noticed this. I'm thinking to start that I'm going to kind of cut off a little bit of this curve here and there, and then mount a piece of wood, like a strip of wood, all the way from the top to the bottom, just so that I have something to kind of mount everything off of. And then after that, I can add some T-nuts so that the whole leg assembly will bolt onto that. Luckily, this part's not going to be seen, so it doesn't have to be pretty. So here's the glue up of the leg. It's rotated 90 degrees right now. I just kind of glued a bunch of pieces together and kind of randomly cut it. And then I'm gonna, or at least I think I'm gonna use some saw and cut that angle so these are all straight, and then just sand it down to some sort of angled curved bit. Hopefully that sort of prevents people from kicking it. And then after that, in this section, I'm gonna add this piece here, which is going to serve as the main support. My initial thought was that it's probably pretty safe to use a handsaw, but then I got kind of bored. Okay, so now I've got the leg installed. I've got this thing sanded down, sort of. I added some wood filler because this is still plywood, so I'm gonna sand this down again and then paint it. But this whole shape is pretty much formed. Put 2 dowels in there and then like a whole bunch of screws along the back facing inwards, but there's only 2 screws at the bottom, so I'm gonna probably have to add a couple more dowels, at least on the bottom, and then maybe 1 or 2 on the side. I added 2 dowels here, and then I installed the screws just temporarily, just bolted it on. So there's 4 now. 1, 2, 3, 4. I had to cut away some, I don't know if you can see that, some recesses in the frame to get this to fit. It's not clean, but it does the job for now. I guess I could have just cut the bolts down, but I had already started doing that when I thought of it. These are going to be 2 more screws, 1 there and 1 on that side in that corner. So now I'm going to pull this whole assembly off and install those threaded inserts on those 2 corners. And then from there, it's pretty much just sand it down and paint it, and then figure out how this top piece is going to connect. This is 3/4 of an inch lower than this surface here, so I need to raise it by 3/4 of an inch, but I'm thinking I might have that extra 3/4 of an inch attached to the tabletop. That way I can have that extra space be like a full cross beam that might go across the whole table, just to add extra reinforcement, kind of help it bend less. If you've made it this far in the video, I gotta say I really appreciate you watching this far. In the timeline of the build, this painting was right before the project deadline, but in the time of this edit, we're coming up to the 1 year mark since this project first started. This video's gone on for more than 45 minutes, and I'm not super keen on spending the time to shortening it, even if that would increase retention or whatever. This is also the point where things started to go downhill, so I may be skipping over some details, firstly because I got some other projects that I want to move on to, and secondly because I honestly don't remember what happened. The end of this project was kind of a blur, which may or may not have been caused by the paint I inhaled before I thought to put this mask on. In case you're wondering, that blower in the back there is an 800 CFM fan that's exhausting air out of this basement, and I do have a window open to equalize the pressure. It turns out pulling the volume of a swimming pool out of your house every hour might be a bad idea, particularly if you have a natural gas furnace that might not be able to exhaust under a vacuum. So, lesson of the minute, turns out wiping this down with this mild cleaner that we usually get from Costco, I think it's Costco, but turns out that solution, whatever cleaning solution was in there, was coming out of the water, and that's what was making the white specks. And I figured that out because then I started wiping it down with isopropyl alcohol, and all the white specks have pretty much rubbed out. You can still see a little bit depending on the angle, but that's good to know. Good to know. So now I have the question of, if I do it again, I could either make it worse or better. So, I mean, this is the angle that the camera will actually be from. And from like this far back, I mean, the surface quality does look pretty bad, but it's not as bad as when you look at it from above. But I mean, then again, I also don't want the people standing here to be distracted by the fact that the surface is so not smooth. So I think I'm still gonna end up doing the last coat of probably watered down polyurethane. Hopefully I can learn a little bit more about the technique, or just enough to hopefully get some less brush marks and sort of smooth things out. I found a YouTube video that strongly suggested using a very thick, wide brush and then trying to not go back as much as possible. So I tried using this 4-inch brush, but in the end, it was still giving me a lot of streaks. I'm guessing it was because my polyurethane was just too thick, but either way, I ended up just wiping it on with a rag. Didn't give me great results, but that was what happened. As you can see, the finish is just kind of horrible. I tried a couple things at the end there to try to, salvage what I had, but it didn't work. And unfortunately, that's just how it's gonna have to be. This is somewhat sort of like what the camera angle would look like from the event perspective. I guess the idea is to have multiple hosts along here, but I don't actually have enough space in this room to mock it up what it would actually look like. It's also a little bit high right now because I have it blocked up. But that's how this table is going to be, I guess, or at least I'm hoping. most of the lighting will be from above, and so when it reflects back up, it hopefully won't be too obvious that the surface finish did not work as intended. I mean, the only chance of potentially changing the finish would be to wrap it that day, or to bring it back home after sometime between now and then and redo this whole thing. But to be honest, I'm not particularly motivated to do that because it just sounds like a lot of work, and yeah, this has gone on for a little bit too long. I would say some more stuff, but I don't quite have time to finish my concluding thoughts. So I'll just voice over it. Real quick, thanks to Justin and the WestMech team for the opportunity to try my hand at this build. If you want to check out the live stream of the competition, I'll link it in the description. See you in the next one. Hopefully it doesn't take another year.